Okay, so now that we've looked at the basics, we can take a look at the real thing here. I'm going to just scrub the timeline, and we can see some movement here on the halo. You can see movement in the sky there in terms of the directional light position. And then eventually we get towards the end, we've got that little emissive boost there on the pillars. And then right towards the end, we're going to trigger that little shooting star Niagara system. So let's dig in a little bit. As far as the blueprints, we've got two of them. There's BP Halo and BP Sphere. The only thing I'm really doing on the Halo is animating the rotation so that it's pointing at the camera, wherever the camera is. The orientation of the halo kind of follows along. That's something I probably could have set it procedurally with like a look at vector, but it was pretty easy to just key it. So that is what I did. Next, moving on to the BP Sphere, it has an events track on it. So for any blueprint that's associated with the level sequence, if you click the little plus symbol there, you can scroll down and add an event track. This is a trigger track. And then if you add a key, I'll just add another one out here, and then double click on that key. You can see this one doesn't have anything associated with it yet. I'll just move this over. So these two events up here, custom events associated with the level sequences director blueprint, they already have events associated with them. And because this trigger track is attached to the BP Sphere, it includes the BP Sphere blueprint object directly as an argument. And then you can just pull off and type in any of the events or functions that are associated with that blueprint. So here I'm triggering animate moons and open sphere. So I think this first one here, if I double click it, is going to be animate moons, and then the second one is going to be open sphere, and this one I don't actually need, so I'll get rid of it. The director blueprint is actually really useful, and I'm going to probably do another video on just on that topic after this one, so stick around for that. There's a lot of really cool stuff that you can do with that blueprint. So anyway, moving on, we've got the camera rig rail, nothing special there. You can see as I scrub through, there is the shot, and there's our center camera actor. It's got a look at tracking enabled, and I just have it looking directly at the BP Sphere object there. There is the two directional lights. The first directional light is going to be the sun. And all I'm really doing there is light color and rotation. So if you wanted to, I'm sorry, that's directional light 2. If you wanted to do any of this kind of stuff, you start with the primary actor, and then you click the plus, and you'll see here there's going to be a component, light component 0. With light component 0, you've got to click on that plus, and that's going to give you access to all kinds of things that are keyable. And many of these things exist over here in the details panel. There are some scenarios where there's objects that are not available to the level sequence. I'll talk about that a little later on. But this is how you access any of those things, right? So for instance, if I wanted to modify the source angle, I can click this, and now I have a new track that I can modify, and I can key and set those values to be whatever I want. I don't really want to do that. I'm going to delete that. But that's how you add these things. So light color, that's pretty simple to modify, and intensity. And so the intensity gets darker, and then as the sun has gone down, the light color is going to cool off a little bit. And I'm moving it this way just to whatever the shot needed. I don't remember exactly why, but that's what made sense. So anyway, that is the primary directional light. I added a secondary directional light, and this object's job was to throw some light and some highlights up here. I don't know, maybe if I hop into the camera cut, I'm going to hide the, let's see, I think I need to select the camera rig rail and then turn off the visualization so it gets out of the way. So if I look at directional light 2, what that one is doing is it's just throwing some light up here. So you can kind of see it like moving from the top left corner to the top right corner. And then for the fog box is actually just a piece of geometry, just a cube that has a very fancy material associated with it. And that material, the instructions for it, the ingredients for making that volumetric fog, came from Ben Cloward, who has a very good tutorial on the topic right here. If you just go to YouTube and punch in Ben Cloward fog, it'll pop up, and he'll walk through the process of creating that material. And then I have a post-process volume. Post-process volumes are really cool. They can do all kinds of really interesting things. Let me go ahead and select it. This is all the stuff that you can modify via post-process volume. And some things I have set up in here that don't need any kind of keying. For instance, there is motion blur. There it is, motion blur. So I've got some motion blur settings. For whatever reason, I had trouble rendering motion blur. It just didn't seem to really work that well. The result from the post-process volume was really good. And what I actually have keyed in here is that lens flare. So there's like a brief moment when the sun goes behind the sphere where I throw a little lens flare, and then I wanted just another little bit of it right at the other side where it pops out, and then I have it go away. But you can add all kinds of interesting things. You can add noise, you can add dirt, you can modify the intensity, the saturation, I mean, all kinds of things. Really cool stuff. So definitely worth investigating. Next is going to be a rec light that's down here, and that's just throwing some light up once everything else gets kind of dark to keep the bottom of it from really just disappearing into the shadows. And then there's some modifications on the skylight. Same idea here, just adding a little bit more light. So you see I go from 5 to whatever, 13 as the primary direction light gets a little bit softer and less intense. There is the Niagara system. I'll go ahead and expand that out. So you get the component, and then there's the system lifecycle, and that is basically just a very simple way to trigger or activate the Niagara system. Easy peasy there. All right, here's the piece of geometry here in the center, these pillars that have their material parameter modified. So if you hit the little plus sign here, you can see there's the static mesh component, which is where the material lives. If I click on that, you can see, oh, there's material element 0. Because I believe there are two materials on here, the gold material and the stone material. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure. It doesn't really matter. I just need to modify the first one. I might not really be using the second one. But anyway, so now that I've got the material element 0, I can come over to the plus sign there, and any parameters that I have exposed to that material are going to be available here for me to keep. So there is fire emissive, and that is how I can easily kick up the heat there and then turn it back down. Now there are some things that for some reason are not available to a level sequence. I'm not entirely sure why, but in the shot I wanted the clouds to speed up and then sort of fade away, like rise up and become less visible, so that they didn't interfere with the stars, because the stars are supposed to be behind the clouds, but the way that I'm doing it, they all kind of hang out right here, and so it was weird to have them sitting in front of the clouds. But I couldn't really access that stuff via the level sequence. If you go to the volumetric cloud, there are things in here that can control the behavior of the clouds, the wind speed and whatever else. There's like the material. You can get in there and tweak that stuff, but for some reason, I just couldn't access it via the level sequence. So instead, I created a blueprint actor that could totally do that stuff. And if you want to check it out, it's not that complicated, but we can consider that one of the perks for buying the project, is you can crack this open and take a look at it. The other stuff that I have here in the project is water and the procedural foliage. And I have a few minutes left in this video, so I think I'm just going to go ahead and tack it on. The procedural foliage stuff is really, really easy to use, and there's a great video on how to set it up from Aziel Arts. Save hours procedural foliage in UE5. So I would definitely take a look at that. That will unlock a lot of the mysteries there. And then as far as the water goes, there's really only a few things that are useful for the vast majority of the kinds of things that you want to do that aren't interactive, right? Like if you want your character to run through it, then that's harder, right? But so I have water body custom. There's a plugin. You've got to enable it and restart the project and all that stuff. But with the water body selected, if I scroll down a bit, there's going to be this water material. You can open that up. And in the water material, if you change the absorption, this is going to be the color, and then scattering is essentially how opaque the water is. So the absorption values, by default, this value is normally like 350, and you can see I've got it basically at 0, so it's very dark and reminds me of the kind of water in lakes near where I grew up. And then as far as the scattering goes, these are those values, you know, whatever, copy them if you like, but this is basically giving it that nice tannic look from lots of leaves being dissolved in or something. So that should be a little bit of a shortcut on the water and the procedural foliage. In the next video, we will go ahead and talk about some of the cool stuff that you can do with director blueprints.